When you look around, from a leopard on the savannah to the bacteria, literally in your own gut, life on Earth it's incredibly diverse. But what if I told you that all of that breathtaking variety, all of it, is written in the exact same language, using just one single molecule? That's what we're digging into today. We're going to explore the code of life, DNA, and figure out how it drives this stunning diversity that's all around us.
So really, where does all this variety come from? I mean, how can one set of rules produce a tree, a mushroom, and a human being? It seems impossible, right? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to zoom in. And I mean way, way in. We're going to take a journey from the scale that we can see with our own eyes all the way down to the molecular blueprint that builds, well, everything.
Okay, so our first stop is actually finding that blueprint, right? To understand diversity, we have to find the instruction manual first. And, like any good manual, it's all organized in layers. So let's start with something we all recognize, an organism, a living being. Any living thing is just a marvel of organization. It's not just some random collection of parts thrown together. Nope, it's a highly structured system. Everything from organs to tissues, it all works together. But what are all those parts actually made of? All right, let's zoom in a level, and what do we find? Cells. These are the tiny, fundamental building blocks of life. Every single living thing is made of them. And inside most of these little factories, there's an even tinier control center called the nucleus. And that is where the real secrets are kept. Okay, so let's peek inside that nucleus. What do we see? We find these structures called chromosomes. Now, a good way to think of them is like tightly packed volumes of an encyclopedia. Each volume has its own specific set of instructions. In us humans, we've got 46 of these volumes. So the big question is, what are they actually written on? And here it is. This is the big one. We've arrived. Each one of those chromosomes is actually a single, incredibly long molecule of DNA. This elegant little twisted ladder, the double helix, this is the ultimate blueprint. Every single instruction for building and operating an entire organism is coded right into the sequence of this one molecule. So, okay, we've found the code, but now the crucial question is, how does the cell actually read the thing? I mean, a blueprint is totally useless if no one can read it, right? So how does the cell take this static DNA code and turn it into the dynamic, living stuff of life? Well, it uses this really sophisticated system to build something called proteins. Think of the DNA as the master recipe book, and it's locked away in the nucleus for safekeeping. Okay, so the whole process kicks off with something called transcription. A specific recipe, which we call a gene, gets copied from the DNA onto like a temporary note card. This note card is called messenger RNA or mRNA. This little copy is small enough to slip out of the nucleus, and it goes and finds a ribosome, which is kind of like a molecular chef. And that's where translation happens. The ribosome reads the recipe on the mRNA and starts building a protein, one ingredient, or what we call an amino acid, at a time. And these proteins, they are the real workhorses. They go on to do literally everything, from building your muscles to running all the chemical reactions in your body. All right, so if every cell is just copying from the same master recipe book, where does all this variety come from? The answer is, well, it's beautifully simple, actually. Typos. Yep, imperfections, little mistakes in the copy. That is the engine of all change. And this typo has a scientific name. It's called a mutation. It's just a random change in the DNA sequence. You can literally think of it as a single letter getting changed in a recipe. Now look, most of these changes don't really matter. Some of them can even be harmful. But every once in a while, a typo creates a brand new, slightly different version of a recipe. And these variations, this is the raw material that fuels all of life's incredible diversity. So these typos come in a few different flavors. You've got a substitution, which is pretty simple. It's just swapping one letter for another. But then you have insertions or deletions, and these are way more dramatic. See, if you add or remove a letter, it shifts the entire way the recipe is read from that point on. This can totally change the final protein and create a radically new dish, so to speak. Okay, so we have the code, and we have the random typos that create all these new versions. But what decides which of these new recipes actually gets passed on to the next generation? Well, this is where the environment comes in. You can think of it as a ruthless editor, or maybe like a taste tester for all these new creations. This whole process has a name, and you've probably heard it, natural selection. And it's such an elegant and powerful idea. Basically, any mutations that happen to create a trait that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its specific environment, well, those are the ones that are more likely to get passed down. And it's not about being the strongest or the fastest in some absolute sense. It's about being the fittest for that one particular time and that one particular place. Let's make this real with a classic example. Imagine a population of grasshoppers. Thanks to mutation, you've got some green ones, some yellow, some brown. Now, if they're living in a lush, green field, what happens? Birds can easily spot and eat the yellow and brown ones. The green ones? They're camouflaged. They survive, they reproduce, and they pass on their green genes. But what if the climate changes and the field becomes dry and brown? All of a sudden, the tables have turned. Now the brown grasshoppers have the advantage. They survive, they reproduce, and over generations, the whole population adapts. The editor, in this case, the changing environment, has just picked a new winning recipe. Okay, so now we've seen the engine, right? It's the DNA code plus random mutations, all edited by natural selection. So now let's zoom back out. Let's see what this simple, powerful engine can actually build when you let it run for, billions of years. So, over these vast timescales, this whole process leads to something called speciation. That's just a fancy word for the birth of entirely new species. It can happen if a single population gets split into two, maybe by a new mountain range or an ocean. Now you have two groups, and they start evolving completely independently. Each group's typos are getting edited by their own unique environments. And the famous Galapagos tortoises, they're the perfect example of this. On the really dry islands, tortoises that happen to have longer necks could reach the high-up shrubs, so they survived better. But on the rainy islands, where there were plenty of plants on the ground, that long neck trait wasn't really an advantage. So after generations and generations of being separated and edited by these totally different environments, they became completely distinct species. And that is how new branches form on the great tree of life. But here's the thing. Don't go thinking this is just about tortoises and ancient history. This evolutionary engine, it is always running, right now. And in the world of microorganisms, it's not just running, it's in overdrive. And it has consequences that affect every single one of us. Let's talk about antibiotic resistance. It's basically natural selection on fast forward. Think about it. In a single bacterial infection, you've got millions, maybe billions of individual bacteria. By pure random chance, one of them might have a mutation that makes it resistant to an antibiotic. So what happens when you take that drug? You create this intense selection pressure. You wipe out all of its competitors. That one lone survivor is now in a field with zero competition, and it just multiplies like crazy. In a shockingly short amount of time, you have an entire population of resistant superbugs. It's the exact same process we saw with the grasshoppers. It's just happening in hours instead of hundreds of years. But and this is a big but, this same knowledge also gives us incredible power. When we understand the rules of the game, we can become the editors for a positive outcome. Take vaccination, for example. It is one of the most powerful tools we've ever invented. By preparing our body's defenses ahead of time, we've driven global polio infections down by a staggering 99%. So you see, understanding the code of life isn't just about explaining the past, it's about giving us the tools to build a much healthier future. So there you have it. We've taken this incredible journey from a whole organism all the way down to its DNA code, and then zoomed right back out to the vast tree of life. We've seen how this surprisingly simple engine, it's just code, copy, error, and selection, is powerful enough to drive all of life's incredible diversity. And since we know that engine is always running, it leaves us with one really fascinating question to think about.